No one noticed the man in seat 14C at first. They noticed the bracelet. It was dull, scratched, and clearly old, yet the way he adjusted it before sitting down didn't match the rest of him. Not nervous. Not casual. Precise. Almost practiced. Then they noticed the jacket. Faded brown. Too thin for winter. No brand. No status. And finally, they noticed the child. A little girl climbed into the seat beside him, hugging a storybook to her chest while he carefully buckled her in, once, twice, checking as if failure wasn't an option. A red-eye flight out of Baltimore. Economy class. Half the cabin already irritated, exhausted, impatient. Two men in tailored suits sat a row ahead, whispering just loudly enough to be heard. Late flight. Kid. Economy, one murmured. The other smirked. Figures. The man in 14C heard them. His jaw tightened for half a second, then relaxed. "Daddy," the girl whispered, sleepy eyes blinking up at him, "can you read the airplane story?" "In a minute," he said softly. "Let's get comfortable first." His voice didn't belong here. It wasn't timid. It wasn't defensive. It was calm in a way that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. A flight attendant passed, eyes scanning for problems. They paused on his boots. His jacket. The small duffel under the seat. "Sir," she said, polite but clipped, "make sure your bag is fully under the seat." "It is," he replied, nudging it an inch anyway.
No argument. No επάλεγη.
The plane began to taxi. Engines hummed. Cabin lights dimmed. The girl leaned against him, already drifting toward sleep. "Do you still like airplanes?" she asked. He hesitated. "I do," he said carefully. "I just like quieter flights now." That answer lingered longer than it should have. Outside, runway lights streaked past the window. Inside, the suited men laughed again. "Some people really shouldn't fly at night," one muttered. The man in 14C opened the storybook. His hands were steady, but not soft. Scarred knuckles. Old marks. The kind you don't get from office work. As the plane lifted into the sky, the cabin settled. Screens flickered on. Conversations faded. No one noticed the faint engraving on the inside of his bracelet when it caught the overhead light for a split second. No one asked why his eyes tracked the ascent like muscle memory. And no one yet realized that judging the man in seat 14C was a mistake they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Because before this flight reached cruising altitude, someone in the cockpit would ask a question that changed everything. Why does passenger 14C know our systems better than we do? Before we continue, if you enjoy cinematic stories like this, subscribe to the channel. The first sign wasn't the shaking. It was the sound. Daniel felt it through the seat before he heard it, a subtle change in the engine's rhythm. Not louder. Not weaker. Wrong. Like a song missing a note no one else knew was supposed to be there. Patterns repeated. This was not random. Mia stirred against his arm. "Daddy." "It's okay," he said calmly, though his eyes were already scanning the cabin. The seatbelt sign chimed on. A few passengers groaned. Someone laughed nervously. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. The captain's voice followed, too smooth, too quick. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. We're experiencing minor air irregularities." Daniel didn't move. This wasn't turbulence. He watched the flight attendants instead. Their shoulders were tense. One whispered urgently into the cabin phone, turning her body away as if shielding the words. Mia gripped his sleeve. "Are we turning around?" "No," he said softly. "Stay buckled." Another flicker, this time accompanied by a faint vibration through the floor. Somewhere near the wing, metal hummed in protest. Across the aisle, a man muttered, "What's happening?" Daniel's jaw tightened, not with fear, but recognition. People rarely noticed until it was too late. A red indicator blinked briefly above the emergency panel, then vanished. Daniel exhaled slowly. Whatever this was, the plane systems weren't talking to each other the way they should. He unbuckled. A flight attendant hurried over. "Sir, you need to remain seated." "I need to speak to the cockpit," Daniel replied quietly. "That's not. I can help." She hesitated, studying his face as if searching for something she couldn't quite name. Before she could respond, a ripple of movement passed through the cabin. A gasp. Someone pointed toward the window. Is that another plane? Daniel turned his head just in time to see it. A dark shape slid into view, perfectly steady. Then another, mirroring the first on the opposite side.
No flashing chaos. No aggressive maneuver.
Just control. They matched the aircraft's speed exactly, close enough that the cabin lights reflected faintly off their wings. Not lightning. Not coincidence. An escort. Whispers spread instead of screams. Fear held tight, contained by confusion. In the cockpit, alarms chimed, then abruptly stopped. The flight attendant's face drained of color as her headset crackled. She looked at Daniel again. Really looked. "Stay here," she whispered, and rushed forward. Daniel took Mia's hand. Outside, the two aircraft held formation, silent and watchful. Whatever rules governed civilian flights no longer applied. Somewhere beyond the cockpit door, the next call would decide who truly controlled the plane. Because in the next few minutes, every decision would fall to him, and once it did, there would be no turning back. The cockpit door closed with a sharp hiss. Inside, the captain and first officer stood frozen as the radar display refreshed. Two unidentified aircraft held perfect formation just off their flanks. Military grade. No transponder ID, the first officer whispered. They've been tracking us since takeoff. A knock sounded. The flight attendant entered, voice shaking. "Captain, there's a passenger. Seat 14C. He used a classified hand signal." The captain frowned. What kind of signal? The first officer's eyes widened as recognition dawned. "Command level. Decommissioned. I saw it once during joint training." The captain's grip tightened on the yoke. "Get him up here. Now." Back in the cabin, the attendant returned to Daniel, her posture entirely different now. "Sir," she said quietly, "the captain is requesting you in the cockpit." Murmurs rippled through the rows. "That guy. No way. He looks like a mechanic."
Daniel knelt beside Mia.
"I'll be right back. Stay buckled." She nodded bravely. "Okay, Daddy." As Daniel walked down the aisle, eyes followed him. The businessman who had insulted him earlier stared, mouth slightly open. The cockpit fell silent when Daniel entered. The captain studied him. "Sir, care to explain why two stealth aircraft are escorting my plane?" Daniel stepped closer to the instrument panel, scanning quickly. His fingers hovered, but didn't touch, recalibrating the radar harmonics in practiced motions. A fleeting memory crossed his mind. Training days, long nights, countless simulations. "You're running an outdated radar harmonics filter," he said calmly. "It's causing false threat flags on military systems." The first officer blinked. The crew exchanged glances, realization dawning before Daniel even confirmed verbally. He adjusted two switches. Static vanished instantly. The radar stabilized. "You designed this system?" the captain asked, voice tight with awe. Daniel gave a small nod, letting the action speak for itself. The radio crackled. "Commercial Flight 781, this is Sentinel Lead. Confirm identity of passenger Daniel Hawthorne." The captain looked at Daniel, stunned. Daniel took the mic. "Sentinel Lead, identity confirmed." A pause. Then, "Permission to render honors, sir." The captain's breath caught. Daniel looked out at the two jets, lights flashing in precise sequence. "Once," he said quietly, "I commanded the people flying those aircraft." The jet suddenly peeled upward, executing a synchronized roll, a silent salute, before settling back into escort position. The radio spoke once more. "Welcome home, General Hawthorne." Daniel handed the mic back. "I'm just a father now," he said. "Please get me back to my daughter." Returning to his seat, Daniel noticed the passengers' reactions. Shocked whispers, wide eyes, mouth slightly open. Something far more powerful than his rank had been revealed, something that changed how they would see him, forever. When Daniel Hawthorne stepped back into the cabin, it felt like he had entered a different plane. Conversations died mid-sentence. Screens paused. Heads turned in unison. The same passengers who had ignored him earlier now watched his every step, their expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and shame. The businessman in the tailored suit, who had mocked his jacket, slowly stood, then sat back down, unsure what to do with himself. Daniel didn't acknowledge anyone. He allowed himself a small smile, but the memory of long nights in the cockpit lingered for a heartbeat. He returned to row 14 and knelt beside Mia, who looked at him with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "were those planes following us?" "Yes," he said gently. "Everything's okay now." She nodded, trusting him completely. Across the aisle, the flight attendant who had spilled coffee earlier approached. Her hands trembled slightly. "Sir," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I was rude and I—" Daniel smiled kindly. "You were doing your job. That's enough." Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded and stepped away. A moment later, the man in the expensive suit leaned forward, his voice low and embarrassed. "General, I didn't know." Daniel looked at him calmly. "That's the point." The man swallowed. "I judged you." "Yes," Daniel said. "You did." The cabin remained hushed as the plane cruised smoothly now, escorted silently through the night sky. The captain's voice came over the intercom, not rehearsed, not polished. "Ladies and gentlemen, our situation has been resolved. Thank you for your cooperation." He paused, then added, "And on behalf of this crew, thank you to a passenger whose experience helped ensure everyone's safety." No name. No rank. Daniel rested his head back against the seat. Mia tugged his sleeve. "Are you famous?" He chuckled softly.
No, sweetheart.
"But everyone's being nice now." "That happens sometimes," he said. "When people remember what matters." The plane felt lighter somehow. Kinder. Passengers who had once complained now offered snacks, smiles, quiet respect. No one asked for pictures. No one demanded explanations. They didn't need them. Outside the window, the escort jets held formation just a little longer, guardians in the dark. But the moment the plane touched the ground, something waited at the tarmac, something that would demand his attention immediately. As the plane began its descent into Phoenix, the cabin buzzed softly, not with fear now, but with anticipation. Mia slept against Daniel's shoulder, unaware of what awaited them. The captain spoke again. "We'll be landing shortly. Please remain seated." When the wheels touched the runway, applause broke out. Daniel didn't join in. He simply held his daughter a little closer. As the plane taxied to the gate, Daniel noticed something unusual through the window: uniforms. 6 figures stood at attention on the jet bridge. Military. The cabin door opened. The first passenger stepped out, then stopped. So did the next. Word spread instantly. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Passengers glanced at one another, awe and quiet admiration in their eyes. Daniel rose only when the aisle cleared. He lifted Mia into his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, and stepped off the plane. The moment his foot touched the jet bridge, every uniform snapped into a salute. A colonel stepped forward. "General Hawthorne. Welcome home, sir." Daniel stiffened. That wasn't necessary. With respect, the colonel said, it absolutely was. Passengers lined the jet bridge, phones lowered, eyes fixed.
No cheating.
Just silence. Respect.
Mia stirred.
"Daddy." He whispered, "It's okay." The salute held until Daniel passed. In the terminal, veterans removed their caps. A woman with a baby whispered thank you. An elderly man reached out, shaking Daniel's hand with tears in his eyes. Daniel returned every gesture quietly. He let himself feel the weight of it all, though only for a heartbeat.
No speeches. No pride.
Just gratitude. But the true impact of that night wouldn't be felt until a year later, through the voice of a little girl whose words would change everything he thought he had left behind. The school auditorium was packed. Parents filled the seats, phones ready, murmurs echoing off the walls. On stage stood Mia Hawthorne, now 11, wearing a simple blue dress and a determined expression. "This is my speech," she began, "about my hero." The room quieted. "My hero doesn't wear a cape," she said clearly. "He wears an old jacket." A few smiles rippled through the crowd. People once laughed at him on a plane because they thought he wasn't important. Daniel stood in the back row, hands clasped, eyes fixed on his daughter. They didn't know his story, Mia continued. But he never got angry. He just stayed kind. She took a breath. My dad used to protect the sky, but he chose to protect me instead. Some parents wiped their eyes. He taught me that respect doesn't come from money, or clothes, or titles. It comes from how you treat others. She smiled. That's why he's my hero. The room erupted in applause. Daniel didn't move. He didn't need to. As father and daughter walked out together, the sky offered one final reminder, that courage and honor leave marks that never fade. Mia tugged his sleeve. Let's go home, Daddy. Home, he whispered, smiling. The parking lot outside the school auditorium glowed under the late afternoon sun. Parents chatted, students laughed, and cars slowly rolled out one by one. Daniel Hawthorne walked beside Mia, holding her hand as if she were still small enough to need it. She skipped once, then stopped and looked back at him. Daddy, she asked, were you nervous when I spoke? He smiled. More than I ever was flying. She giggled. Really? Really? They reached their car, but Daniel paused before unlocking it. Something caught his attention, something familiar, distant, and unmistakable. A low rumble. He looked up. High above the orange-streaked sky, two thin white lines carved across the clouds, forming a perfect V. They moved fast, graceful, almost ceremonial.
Mia squinted.
Are those jets? Yes, Daniel said softly. Do you know the pilots? He hesitated. Maybe. Or maybe they just know me. The contrails held their shape for a few seconds longer, then slowly began to fade. Around them, other parents noticed too. Some pointed. Some filmed. But no one spoke. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. Not pride, not sadness, but something deeper. Closure. He had spent years believing that once he stepped away, the sky would forget him. That his service would fade into paperwork, replaced by newer names and younger faces. But the sky never forgets its guardians. Mia leaned against him. They look like they're saying goodbye. Or thank you, Daniel replied. They stood there until the lines dissolved into blue. When they finally got into the car, Mia buckled herself in and looked serious. Daddy. Yes. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. Daniel turned to her. Brave doesn't always mean flying jets. She nodded. Sometimes it means being kind even when people are mean. His eyes stung. That's exactly right. As they drove away, the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon gold. Behind them, the school grew smaller, just another building holding an important memory. Daniel reached up and adjusted the old steel bracelet on his wrist, not out of habit, but gratitude. But the story of Seat 14C wasn't finished yet, because the world had learned a lesson from Seat 14C, a lesson it would carry forever. The video surfaced 3 days later. Someone had recorded the escort from inside the plane. The shaky footage showed two jets sliding into formation beside a commercial aircraft, lights flashing in perfect rhythm. Within hours, it was everywhere. Headlines speculated. Comment sections exploded. Who was the passenger? Why were fighter jets escorting a civilian flight? Was it a threat or a hero? Daniel ignored it all. He cooked breakfast. He packed lunches. He walked Mia to school. At work, his co-workers treated him the same, because they didn't know. And he liked it that way. But the story kept spreading. Eventually, someone connected the dots. A retired officer. A former commander. A quiet engineer who never talked about his past. People were stunned, not by his rank, but by how little he seemed to care about being known. A local reporter knocked on his door one afternoon. "General Hawthorne," she said eagerly, "the public wants to hear your story." Daniel shook his head. "It's not my story." "But you fixed the plane. You were escorted by jets." "I was a passenger," he said calmly. "Just like everyone else." She frowned. "Don't you want recognition?" Daniel glanced inside, where Mia sat at the table doing homework, humming softly. "I already have it." The reporter left empty-handed. Online, debates raged. Some praised him. Others argued over titles and authority. But one comment, buried deep, rose to the top. My dad was on that flight. He said the bravest thing wasn't the jets. It was how that man stayed kind when no one respected him. Daniel read it once. Then he closed the browser. That night, as he tucked Mia into bed, she asked, "Why do people care so much now?" "Because sometimes," Daniel said, "people need reminders." Of what? That you never really know who someone is. She smiled sleepily. Like superheroes in disguise? Exactly like that. Daniel turned off the light. Outside, the sky was quiet. Peaceful. But somewhere far above, pilots trained, watched, protected, carrying forward a legacy built by those who came before them. Not for praise. For duty. And in the end, one simple truth would remain. The lesson that flight taught everyone on board. A lesson about courage, kindness, and the quiet power of integrity. A year later, Daniel flew again. Same airline. Same economy class. Different seat number. He wore the same old jacket. The same boots. The same bracelet. This time, no one mocked him. Not because they recognized him, but because something had changed. People spoke more softly. Smiled more easily. Offered help without being asked. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe the world had learned something it couldn't unlearn. Daniel sat by the window, watching clouds drift past.
No escorts. No alarms.
Just flight. A young man across the aisle struggled with his bag. Daniel stood and helped him lift it. "Thanks," the man said. "Long day." "Me too," Daniel replied. A child behind him kicked the seat accidentally. Daniel turned, smiled, and the kicking stopped. No rank. No authority. Just respect. As the plane climbed, Daniel rested his head back and closed his eyes. He thought of that night. Of fear turning into awe. Of judgment turning into humility. Of a little girl watching how her father chose kindness over anger. The lesson had never been about jets or generals. It was about how we treat people when we think they don't matter. The plane leveled off. Daniel glanced at his bracelet one last time, then covered it with his sleeve. Seat numbers change. Titles fade. But character flies higher than all of it. They mocked a seat number, but they forgot respect isn't assigned, it's earned.